Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the BIM Tube podcast. So today I'm with Victor Alasia, and we've known each other for several years. So welcome, Victor. Thank you for joining me, first of all.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and we're both very busy people. It took us some time to finally get together. So I'm very pleased that we've both been able to make it, and I appreciate your time. So as with all the guests, it would be really great to hear like a bit of your background and your history, and just first of all, just introduce yourself, but critically, how did you get into the role that you have now, and what's been your journey? So over to you, Victor.
Thanks, Steve. So currently, at the moment, I work as a lead solution consultant at a company, OpenText. OpenText is probably the world's largest information management company. So we focus on information management throughout from enabling supply chains to interoperate, to stock content management, document management, to cybersecurity, to IT operations management, IT service management systems, and AI, artificial intelligence, business intelligence. We cover the whole breadth, and we really targeted at all verticals, and also various size of companies, to the largest enterprises in the world, the smallest companies. So how did I get here? I started my career started as a geographer, and the reason why I became a geographer was I had two elder brothers when I was younger. One is 2 years older, and the other one 4 years older, and they were in high school before me. So they brought this book called Learning, the geography book. I just read from cover to cover. I was one of those kids that read everything they saw. My dad had a large library, and I just read all the time. But this geography book struck me for some strange reason. And as time went on, I was deciding what to do at uni. My dad wanted me to do geology. I wanted to do surveying, geodesy, and photogrammetry, but I just had this thing that each time I looked at the curriculum, like I was like, I'm not going to be able to study something about human things, or I'll be missing something. So in the end, I just took this brave decision, like, you know what, I'm going to go read geography. I think it'll cover everything. And so I kind of in 94, I think, I got admission University of Nigeria, and joined the geography department. So, and it started from there. I noticed that everything in geography, was about systems, climate systems, geomorphological systems, human settlement systems. And so this systems thing, I seem to, everywhere I look in geography, there's always something to talk about systems. So it was always in my mind. And the third year, we did a course around systems, the systems theory, and and that really got me hooked on systems. And then that same year, we studied geographical information systems and remote sensing. And I got an internship in a large oil and gas company to work on environmental management systems. They were trying to do ISO 14001 certification of all their oil field assets. So that, environmental management systems again, just kind of struck me. And so then I got another opportunity to work on one of the largest gas plants in the world at the time, in the environmental impact assessment of a new kind of train they were building. And so that got me involved in EIAs, environmental impact assessments, environmental sustainability, and then being able to understand that all the geography knowledge, all the different places, social impacts, physical impacts, all sorts of impacts, economic impacts, all those things. So that kind of realized this seems like geography. So I did my bachelor's thesis in environmental impact assessments using GIS, and did a bit of work in oil and gas as well, using GIS and remote sensing to do things like oil spill mapping. At that time, it was just the start of GIS was quite, it wasn't as it is today, of geographical information systems. And a gentleman I was working with at the time, I think it was from the UK, but I can't remember who the name now. Why don't you just go do a master's degree, in GIS and remote sensing, or So I had an opportunity to do a PhD straight away at Durham University, but I kind of made the decision to go to Greenwich at the time, University of Greenwich. They had a good GIS, Geographical Information Systems and remote sensing course at the time. But I kind of halfway through the course, I felt like, I came from more theoretical background. I wanted a bit more time to study, so I switched my course to Germany to do geomatics engineering at the University Karlsruhe, University of Applied Sciences, and it was a course that had a great mix of IT, geoinformatics, GIS, remote sensing, and urban management systems, urban informatics. So that really, and I got some exposure working in urban hydrology, how to document cities, the mix of architecture and geomatics and buildings. And I finished a master's degree and returned to the UK, worked in logistics planning, how to distribute mails, plan the delivery of mail all across London for a bit, and then kind of switched into town planning. And as soon as I joined the town planning boundary, it was that point where councils were changing. Like it was one of the London boroughs, councils were changing, a lot of developments very fast. But immediately I realized actually there were no systems to manage this change. So I got thrown into as a more like a systems analyst, focused on highway assets management systems. And then gradually, I like to think I did a great job there. And then I got involved in actually, why don't you take over dealing with everything to do with documenting the city and, and the data that comes out of it. Because every other department would call and say, well, we need the data about something that's happened or something that was built, but the data wasn't ever really there. So in terms of data quality, the data was being produced as, the timely quality or temporal quality wasn't there, and sometimes the coverage wasn't there, and sometimes the level of detail. Sometimes, for example, asset management department in a local authority wants to know how a whole building is structured, for example, because maybe there's a decent homes compliance thing to do, but somebody's just maybe thought about the building shell. So there's no transactional data to log on the data in the asset management system. So all those did a lot of projects to make the quality of the data relevant, to what the enterprise needed. And at that time, I was fortunate to work with an enterprise architect. It was a contractor that came in, so I kind of got exposed to that. And then so I realized actually there is an actual discipline that, enterprise systems engineering discipline that if I actually apply this method, my job will be easier. The way to convince stakeholders will be easier. I could carry people along. I could use the right language. I think that was around the kind of the time we met at, I think it was a statistical, after there was census, 2001, 2011, there was census, and the government was thinking about this new methodology of census. I think it was a Society for Location Analysts meeting that we met at the first time. So from that I got any type of system, organization. I was the kind for like 8 years. You become a go-to person. During the Olympic Games, the 2012 Olympic Games, I was fortunate to be the joint local authority regulatory service lead for example, making sure the games, the addressing systems, security addressing system, which is a major component of any urban management system. Because the security addressing systems were set up. People don't realize that everywhere you go to any city, you can just move find a way around. Somebody's actually thought about how to organize the city at different levels. London, the different localities, anywhere you go, down to the actual room you go into in a hotel, or down to the actual floor you in a building. Somebody's thought about layering it, even for example, the way buildings are named, the way floors are named, there's international standards for that, and actually the way even you address a building. For example, if I'm thinking about somebody going to that has a can see, the way I label a floor on the 17th floor, an address, for example, apartment 1708, immediately that person's brain, there's environmental psychology thing behind, there's a whole science of behind such of things, and that's part of geography and civil engineering. People don't realize the soft part of civil engineering. So yeah, so I did that for quite a long time, and then in 2016 I moved to be a solution systems architect for a company that focused on managing infrastructure across one of the large infrastructure asset management companies. And it was more a way I got exposed like to solutions architecture and actually how that affects pre-sales, how you configure, how you think about what you sell, how you design solutions to take to market. And I did that for a couple of years, and then I realized actually, I think I stumbled across just somebody on LinkedIn, and we were having a conversation, and that would you like to consider joining our company? We just might come there work for now, and I've been here for over 5 years now, and it's been which is basically now what I kind of do a lot of the times is people don't realize at the same time that when every product you have in your house, if you take your towel, you see that you open it, you see EAN number, European article number, for example. That is the same thing you do when you go to a building, it has an address or unique property reference number. So that is a standard called ISO 8000. So I work around using that standard for data management, basically make sure that the data you're producing suits the requirements of the ecosystem or the multi-enterprise supply chain or the enterprise or the organization or the team even. So data management based on ISO 8000, and also other things, for example, when we have financial clients, when you need to move transactions around, you need to know the legal entity, but then transactions have to be identified. You need unique transaction identifiers. So I do a lot of that, things like that. So anything to do with data management, getting different people to be part of the value chain that's successful.
Thanks, Victor. I was listening there thinking, you're like me in many ways, that although I didn't actually study geography, I did environmental biology. It was always at a systems level, because you said systems quite a lot there, and I thought, yes, that's exactly the commonality how I've always seen things. Things are linked because you did geography. Things are linked, and at scale things are connected. There is a system within a system. The bigger picture, basically. And I think that's really interesting, because we've had both quite diverse careers ourselves, haven't we? Like you've said, you've moved across different sectors. But I think just for the benefit of people listening and watching, when you use the word system initially, you were meaning management system, right? And then we started to talk about information system. I think I'm exactly like you. I will use the word system in both. But I think sometimes people don't get it when you talk about an environmental management system, for example. Again, this is not for you. This is for the benefit of people listening and watching. We mean a governance structure, don't we? We mean a framework, as well as the technology, which is also called a system. I mean, have you got anything just to say? I will pick up the topics that we're going to discuss, but have you got anything to say about people, the challenge around people just not understanding that sometimes when we say system, we mean a governance structure, a framework, and people are just focused only on the technology. And I think, have you experienced that? How do we get people to think bigger, to think of a management system of governance?
I think the thing is to make people understand, and because the types of people, and I realize there are types of intelligence. I think there's a book I read once about different 9 types of intelligence. Because I used to, when I was younger, I used to think I wasn't even good at math, but then later I realized, no, I was good at math. If you showed me trigonometry, showed me the earth, and showed me a physical problem, I could understand math. So I understood right from young that I had spatial intelligence, but I also had existential intelligence. I want to know the actual reality all the time. But then when you start looking at it, you realize actually things don't exist alone. things, we're in a world where, if people who are into chemistry will know like the concept of thermodynamics or energy exchange, gravity, that things affect things, and things are part of bigger things. All things are related, but like the first law of geography, things that are nearer are more related than things that are far apart. So there's always interrelationship between things, whether they are the actual things or the things to manage the actual things. We should, when we talk about management systems, but I haven't seen any. I used to tell people I haven't seen anybody that goes around with their city in their pockets, because it's too big to fit into your pocket. But if you want to manage it, then you need something you can maybe put into a computer or put on a book. In a book, like Doomsday Book, for example, was an information system to manage the actual physical system at some point. And then nowadays that Doomsday Book is just, we happen to go in the computer, and then maybe when we talk about things like BIM, one of the buildings that may be taxed, which is the building system, there's an information system to inform somebody about how the system is. So just like even databases are systems to manage, help people understand the reality. So the actual reality of the system itself, but the means of managing the actual reality, which is the information system or management system, is a system itself, because it's basically used to understand the more complex system, abstracted, and then you can manage what you at least visualize and touch and conceptualize.
And I think that connection with geographic information systems and geography then comes across. I think what I'm seeing now is people talking about GIS and things like geographic information systems that don't have a background, and part of that is the link with BIM, building information modeling. Is BIM something you talk about in your day job? Do clients talk about BIM? So either I mean 3D modeling, or I mean the international standard, either. But is that a term that comes up? Do you actually talk about that a lot, or not really?
Yeah, so my colleagues that work in content management systems, so people that OpenText is one of the largest content management system provider in the world. My colleagues that deal with content management systems, large engineering infrastructure and assets, they talk about BIM. They talk about BIM a lot, because basically you're managing, you're documenting the infrastructure. People are doing things like, and when they talk about BIM, they're not just talking about the construction of the asset, as you would think. Many people, when they're talking about BIM, it seems to stop at that. But for someone like me and someone like my colleagues, we're looking at the whole life cycle delivery phase of the asset. It might be 100 years, some of these assets, and how it's managing a system to manage all the things. Somebody goes and inspects it, for example, which is where I come in. Somebody goes and inspects a building, and then they have to put it somewhere that inspection has taken place, because that inspection, for example, can say, oh, this is the condition of the asset right now. Or somebody goes and inspects a piece of road or a facility, a plant somewhere. That inspection is a transaction. The person inspecting the asset, that piece of infrastructure, is an entity that's inspecting another entity that creates a transaction. And so if you, for example, think about all those transactions that take place, like, people, inspect, people maintain, people intervene, the system has behaviors that it should have, as designed. If people manage or maintain the system in a certain way for over a period of time, the behavior might change. So we think about BIM in that entirety. We're not just thinking about the one-off. And so someone like me that, for example, where I've managed data about cities from, where the first information about something that was built was logged in 1847, because I used, for example, a law from 1847, Town and Countries Improvement Clauses Act of 1847, and it defines what building, what street means, which is not the layman term that someone understands it. I'm thinking about all that data and all the things that happened. Oh, there was a planning application, someone tweaked something. How would that system behave now? You know, and so we look at people call that digital twins nowadays, but that's we've always done these things. It's just that maybe now people are trying to maybe give them new names so other people can understand the complexity. But for example, when I was working a lot in the city, and maybe thinking about things like building control, building surveyors, and so with a lot of my clients, and I would say, oh, actually, I can see lots of reports coming that people change boilers. How do we make sure that actually that transaction is logged against the right entity? Because if I want to do an analytics report, and maybe tomorrow somebody will want to use ChatGPT to do an AI report to say, oh, what's happened to this particular flat over 20 years? I want to get the right information or the right insights about that property. So yeah, so we do BIM a lot. We do BIM, myself and my colleagues, but we think about BIM from an entire life cycle concept, not just the one-off. People call it product lifecycle management in places like engineering and aerospace, but we do that,
It's interesting, isn't it? The different terms. Yeah, again, for the benefit of people listening or watching, the BIM in the context that we're talking about now aligns with that international standard ISO 19650 9650 series, which. But that's for other people to look it up, right? Where there is, and it can be and should be, whole life. But then it's interesting because then we've got different language. I know you mentioned digital twins. I was probably going to ask you about that later. and I think you're like me. It's all a continuum. It's all at a systems level, because now we're talking about connected digital twins. But I think one of the things is you've always seen it that way, right? You've always worked at a systems level. So then when people say, "Oh, we should think at a systems level," you'll say, "Well, I have been, I do." So it's really challenging sometimes just to pick up the language around asset management. I mean, that obviously we've got backgrounds in that as well. I think that's where that's been maybe easier to describe. So for example, works activity, inspections or something, or defect analysis. Do you still see that as disconnected in a lot of companies? So for example, people might have an FM, a facilities management system, which is still maybe not for your day job because you're joining them up, but just generally that's still seen, I think, as a separate thing. Do you find that with a lot of clients, like FM or asset management still separate?
Yeah, people still see that as separate, and oftentimes it is not because of that there's nobody probably that has a systems thinking approach to understanding the actual reality. It's just that the organizations tend to be, this is another part, HR, then HR and maybe more strategic information, organizational design, is people design organizations based on their internal reality or consensus reality. So somebody could say, oh, that is this tribe, they just do their own thing, give them a name, put them in a box. This is this tribe, give them in, put them in the box, and the company runs. But because of that virtual boundaries or ideological boundaries that somebody's had as internal reality, this is what exists. And then a group of people have a consensus reality, this is the reality. So you find that actually there is this barrier of people interacting, people exchanging information, and people working to the mission of the enterprise, in some case, multiple enterprises. And when it's virtual work, sometimes people don't see the impact of that. For example, when I work with people that are maybe into automotive industry, because if you didn't do that, if you didn't have your interworking done right, you probably wouldn't have a car delivered at the right time. So people would know and reorganize to get the outcomes. When it's virtual work, when maybe it's virtual products people are delivering, value of services. People will, oh yeah, we just always have this problem, but maybe we should always have this problem. People don't go into the why are we having this problem? Why is there this defect? And then it's another thing as a consultant where I will go, okay, this is a defect. Okay, as a consultant or Lean Six Sigma, let me see how I can help you improve this process so you optimize it and there are no defects. But then people don't go to the right consultants. So why are we having this problem? Companies that are more, I tend to see the larger companies, more successful companies, people, the top 250 companies in the world, they have this understanding that they will bring the right person in. They'll say, okay, we have a problem. We don't know we have a problem, but perhaps let's get a facilitator. Perhaps let's get a consultant in to just observe what we're doing and tell us what something doesn't have to go wrong first. I think that's probably it's more the enterprise architecture, the organizational design tends to be the problem for what I see than actual that it makes people have the internal reality, the consensus reality that's different from the actual reality. So the design systems that there is a mismatch between, and then the lack of optimization then happens, and the defects and waste and those sort of things occur.
It's a very good point. You mentioned HR systems as well. That was one example, and of course that is that is often separated, and then you get finance system and no, but it's a good point. It reflects people's thinking. The other thing it reflects, which is implied in what we're talking about, is funding streams, because people have different, follow the budget, right? If people have different budgets in different business units or directorates, then you end up with different systems. I still find that a challenge to try and get people thinking strategically. But just to change topic just slightly, just to pick up something very specific, because I'm interested as well, because it's not my sector, but one of the things we were going to talk about is multi-enterprise supply chain integration and interoperability. Now, I guess indirectly we're talking about that, but have you got any examples or case studies of where you've worked in improving sort of supply chain integration, interoperability? And firstly, what do you mean by that? So there'll be people listening that don't quite know what we mean by that. So if you explain what it is, please.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you learn something when you're, say, in college, and then later on in your life, you just find that you're doing it without even actually planning to do it. So I always knew, for example, when I was working in the built environment sector, that there are certain things, especially when connecting and doing transactions at scale, that we didn't do that as much. And I was wondering, what other sector did that? And just happened to realize that companies that were into production actually do that, and to understand how that worked, especially around I knew I'd nailed master data management pretty well, which is managing data about things that transactions take place against at scale, at the urban scale, at the London scale, sometimes at country scale. But I kind of immediately realized, especially when I was trying to design systems that help people manage assets, enterprise asset management systems, manage infrastructure, that our sector hadn't got that quite right. So, and sometimes maybe in life, when you're thinking about things, an opportunity comes along, and so then I got the opportunity to move into OpenText, and the team I joined at OpenText at the time, currently now, is the OpenText Business Network team. And business networks basically are a network organization of companies that in a supply chain or value chain that organize to produce products. And to do that, they need to exchange information, sometimes high volume information, sometimes hundreds of thousands of messages every day. And these are different companies that all have, they have physical companies, physical locations, but they all have digital locations, which are system endpoints, applications, IoTs. So we at OpenText, we are the largest business network in the world. We do like 28 billion transactions every year, for example, $9 trillion worth of commerce passing through the platform. So a business that's to enable a business network to work, especially business networks where the global scale networks of companies participating to create value, to create products, global value chain. Sometimes they're more regional, sometimes maybe they're national. We can talk about retail, like supplying a large retail store with all the food you see in the store. So that they have to, unlike say a government organization where everybody uses the same standards, they typically sets of standards they have to use for managing master data. For example, many people would know is for a standard called DS1, which is a global standard for identifying products. There's a standard, for example, for identifying legal entities, although they're different standards. And so to manage and make these large, often networks of businesses participating in the value chain to work successfully, we have to design systems for that. And those systems are information systems, the data systems, the infrastructure systems, the cloud systems, the platforms as a service, software as a service. This is basically to get that product in the shop safe, optimally, to get that car built optimally, to even things like make sure that your post is delivered optimally. We design systems for that. Same thing in a hospital, electronic medical records, electronic patients records. People don't realize those things have to be moved around so that when you're in front of the doctor has enough the right information to know what to do with about your situation. And so so we're basically, there's many times I just say, oh well, I was involved in that. It's kind of different a bit different from when you work in a city where you design what all the addresses will be, what all the streets will be named as, what all the postcodes will be. You also, I was involved in that project. It's another kind of way up. You travel everywhere on a vacation. Oh yeah, that's my client. So but that's basically what it is. It's the kind of thing that enables commerce to what happened at the global scale, the type of capabilities.
Yeah, and I think it's still the same concepts, isn't it? In the last two examples, or you're reflecting back on a local authority where it's conceptually, or maybe you disagree. For me, it's conceptually the same, but it's just at scale. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like a microcosm. I see things like fractals. It's like things have to be linked at a small scale or at a big scale. I think just to reflect on our previous conversation, or a point that we were making about maybe why things are not so joined up traditionally in some domains. And I think it's because the reason hasn't been, a good enough reason hasn't been there. So when we're talking about supply chain integration, things must be connected.
Yes.
Like you have to be connected. Like that's it. You have to get. But in other scenarios, people just don't have to be connected, but things can continue in an inefficient way as they have done. So I think anyway. So I'm talking here, but please reflect on that, please. Yeah,
that's exactly correct. And then you have to think about the whole thing, like the physical system, real system. In this case, is more in it's easier sometimes when you're doing government work and it's government clients, because then there's a data transfer format that everybody's using. There's a common data entry convention that everybody adheres to. So the cost and the effort to mediate in terms of translate data mapping, or what does the system, they're still in the same value chain, but one is in one country, they're using on an American standard, and someone's using an ISO standard in the data management system, and someone's using something. So in that case, we're mediating standard, but then somebody communications protocols, because all these things go over communications protocols. Some are using latest and greatest internet protocols, like simple object access protocol, which is a protocol that a language that the internet uses to communicate, and some of them are using some protocol from 1950 something. For example, it could be X400 or some. In Germany, some are using basically mediating those protocols as well. That's not just the data structures themselves, but actually the the protocols of communications, the telecommunications protocol, which is another funny thing again, because when I did my master's in 2000, in geomatics, one of the things we did study was communications protocols. It was a course, communications and navigation protocols. Because in geographers as well, people forget that part of being a geographer or being a geoinformatics professional. There's actually protocols, that's how your sat navs work. We've got to know those things as well. So yeah, so even mediating those protocols to make sure that what we're essentially doing with distributed systems integrators. So systems are distributed, and we basically making sure that it's integrated for one mission. And I suppose maybe James Webb or the guys who designed the NASA program to the moon, that's what they would have been thinking. How do you bring all these different people working in this space program to get a man to the moon and bring him back safely and do other large-scale missions?
Sorry, I was just thinking, you use the word mission there, and I think that's often what's lacking, isn't it? That vision or mission or common purpose. Maybe it hasn't been there, and then obviously you come in with your colleagues, you're providing that, or you get involved when someone knows that they need to change. Just on just picking up mission, do your clients or people you've worked with through your career, are they talking about things like ESG, so environmental, social, and governance targets, or things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? So what I mean is a big outcome, big benefits. Do people talk about that, or are they still at a lower level?
Increasingly seeing that, I could say probably 70%, especially in supply chain integration. 70% of clients are talking about this sort of things, and fortunately, which is how things align. I currently did the ESG solutioning in Europe for my company right now, and so if you can imagine, at each supply chain or each business network, what we are trying to do is to improve the ESG compliance. So we aggregate data at large from different ESG, because it's not like there is a regulatory reporting thing, which is links to asset management that's been involved before, this international financial reporting standard. And what people don't realize, why sometimes asset management got made a priority a few, maybe 10, 15 years ago, or things like local government transparency code acts. And you had to, before, when I joined local authorities, accountants might just say, oh yeah, this is the amount of assets we have, the amount of street light, amount of roads. Oh, it was all they guessed usually. But then with the IFRS, you had to make sure that the physical register of this is how the gross total value of all my asset, this is my gross replacement cost. You could prove that a link to a physical asset register and all those maintenance operations that make it increase the value or make it depreciate. You have to prove that. So we're having that with the ESG right now. At the start, ESG is more companies that are consultants would say, do a questionnaire that you have to fill, and then you get a block score, but you cannot typically break down that score. You've got things like scope 1 emissions that are trying to make it like a regulatory reporting. Scope 2 and scope 3 is difficult to link the thing you're saying is causing the climate change impact to the actual transaction activity or the actual assets, for example. So anyway, we tend to aggregate from suppliers, we're aggregator at large, and then we then try to understand the ESG rating of a supply chain or a value chain or individual participants in that value chain. They work with our clients to see how through supplier onboarding or customer, they can improve those ESG scores. And then we also, as a company, OpenText, have goals. Some of the SDGs that we had done, in fact, we were discussing that yesterday. And so, for example, goal no poverty, goal 1, because we're involved at the business network level, making sure commerce takes place optimally. Then more people participating in global commerce means that we're able to achieve that goal. And the many other goals like industry, innovation, infrastructure. I think that's goal 9. Reducing equities, goal 10. Urban management systems, will fall in the goal 11, sustainable cities and communities. Climate action, goal 13. So yeah, we think OpenText, we actually aligned to the SDGs because our CEO has kind of looked at that and said actually the UN has done a good job. So yeah, the other ESG standards, but we align to the SDGs and we try to make sure that we deliver, help business networks, value chain networks, and individual companies improve their ESG performance. And at some point in the future, we may go to the point where, because we have IoT, we are dividing the IoT gateways, with the point where we can, maybe sometime in the future help people measure the actual transactions and actual things that contribute to ESG and make sure that that's working. It's similar to when regulatory reporting for IFRS, for example, and asset management.
Yeah, great, because it's that link, it's that updating of the information, isn't it? That's traditionally been the challenge. I mean, like an asset register, for example, it's not infinitely complex to make an asset register. In fact, it's probably quite easy, especially nowadays with satellite imagery. The challenge is maintaining it. It's like, is it up to date? Oh, I'm not sure. And I'll put a link into some of the things that you've mentioned here. But one of the standards that you mentioned there was ISO 8000. Yeah. And again, that's data quality. And you mentioned enterprise master data. But have you got anything just to elaborate on that a little bit, just about the maintenance of things, and that people don't necessarily understand that you can't just, things are not a project, we can't just get a new database, or we can't just link that. We need to maintain it. We need to train people. We need to educate people. Have you got anything to say about that, more about the education of people? You know what I mean? Not necessarily the technology, but educating people to say this is an ongoing thing around data management. Is that something you get involved with?
It's an organization I'm a member of called Electronic Code Commerce Management Association, or in other words, ECCMA, and I've been involved with them since I was in local authority. Because one of the things I like to do is find the best book, the best organization. It may not be in my sector that does something that does something, and see how they do it. So ECMA does a lot of education in terms of things like especially legal entities, and so you can reconcile to legal entities. Because what I defined initially was that companies, financial services in the UK, I think easily people will spend over 40 billion in doing probabilistic matching and cleansing of data because people didn't use the official company's number from company's house, and all they needed to do was to put a prefix, smart prefix, UK, the code list of what the company's house organization is, dot the actual LEI name plus companies, and they may just put a date of formation like a birthday, hoping that you can legally, authoritatively identify a company, and then that company takes place in transactions. And then there may be third-party proxy people that identify those companies. So ECMA does be doing a lot of education in that, and then things like, for example, now transport unit identifiers. That it's a new standard. It's just it's an ISO standard that just that's just been worked on. People don't realize actually how do you identify a transport unit? Unique transaction identifiers is a big thing in financial services that people are trying to understand, and things like even the messaging of financial transactions, ISO 22000. So there are a lot of standards, and we probably more can be done, but in ECMA, for example, we do a lot of education on because data in the first one of the things people don't actually understand as well is that when computers were first built, you couldn't separate the operating system from the software. they were all bound together, and then got to a point where that be successful broke the two apart. Then you couldn't separate the the software from the data. A lot of the time, people think that companies, there have been legal, case law where somebody says, "Oh yeah, actually, because your data was on my software, the data belongs to me." So companies, what we try to do, for example, FMI, is to educate people to architect the enterprise architecture, that you have a business architecture, how your business works, and based on your business architecture, you then create a data architecture. You then have information systems architecture, and then you have your technology architecture, your infrastructure architecture. All those are layered and they're partitioned, and that's even things like your copyright or design right is protected. And then when you get to the data layer for ISO 8000, you're saying, what is this data going to be used for? Is it going to be used to enable an ecosystem to interoperate and make products? Is it going to be used to enable a construction project to work? Well, is it going to be used to maintain an infrastructure over 50 years? So once the mission is established, then the enterprise information requirements, and then that actually fits into, for example, what us in the BIM and geospatial tribe may call BIM. So actually, it's a strategy to things. There's enterprise planning, there's ecosystem planning, and that goes back to systems engineering. It's a system you design, and just think about it like, someone's called you to build a plane. You will ask, what's the operating environment? Where will I use this? What's the mission? And then based on that, you will then design an organizational system, a production system, any kind of system to enable you to achieve that mission. But don't just build and walk away. You have to continuously operate it, so that you take a submarine, you go into the sea, you come back again, or you take a boat, you go out. So you still have to make sure that, or that plane, people don't just build a plane, fly it every day for 30 years, no maintenance. You need to be making sure that it has the qualities and the attributes and the capabilities and capacities to meet its mission in the operating environment. And that's, as a systems engineer, it's just a system. And that's one of the books I have there is a book about, one of the best books I think is System Engineering, the book about systems engineering, analysis, design, and development. And it's a very great book, because even how you solve problems, because the systems, it's an actual science that people go to spend thousands in MIT to read, but you can get the best book from.
Victor, I'll link to it. If you have an affiliate link, then I'll link to it. Maybe we'll get $1 for. But I mean, that is a very serious point, that people don't read or go to events or read books outside of their domain, and look broader. I think your point really resonated with me. We were talking about the layers, so enterprise architecture, thinking of things as layers, and you were talking about decoupling the data. That, I mean, almost on a daily basis, I have a similar conversation. I still think that's difficult for people. If data is in Excel, for example, as far as people see it, in an example, they still find it hard, I think, to decouple the data. And I think the reason is because it would actually be hard for them to decouple the data. Do you know what I mean? Like physically, because they maybe don't have the skills that we might have. So I think there is a practical element of it is hard. Have you got anything to say? Just I know you touched on the standards, but just something more about how do we get people to try and think of the data being decoupled? I mean, how have you done it? Have you gone in somewhere and they just can't? They keep mentioning a product. So one of the challenges I get, people keep mentioning a particular software product. And I keep saying, no, it's not the product, it's the data in the product. I mean, how do you have that conversation? It's because I'm interested. I mean,
the thing I've seen, which is another standard, I think is I think ISO 44,000. It used to be BS 11,000, collaborative business relationship management systems, and that's another system as well. But because many people, I think you said this before in one of your podcasts, that many people are paid to do a job in a certain way. typically, and that goes back to our earlier conversation about how enterprises are designed, organizations are designed. And what I see often lacking in many organizations, and where I solve that through being a trusted advisor to the right person to shape their thinking, which is as a solution architect or value engineer, like you sometimes you wear a trusted advisor hat. And sometimes it could be just maybe you meet someone at the conference, or you go for corporate hospitality kind of meet, and the conversations I had that where you say, try to be an evangelist to persuade somebody to see things, thought leadership, to get people to see things differently, because ultimately the internal reality and the consensus reality of people in that organization may be not helping what their corporate strategy may say they want to achieve, and getting them to understand, actually, the way you're doing things is nice, it's great, but it was for when your company was trying to be a small company. Your company wants to be the best company. You will need to have a new operating model, and this operating model being require that you have to do things in a slightly different way. And it's almost like a trusted advisor and if they trust you, then okay, actually, let's try. Okay, let's do a pilot project on one small thing, and then let's measure it. And when as often companies, when they begin to get that trust, then say, oh, you know what? I tend to find some clients who wants to come. Let's do more. Let's basically do this transformation. They get excited because they now see like the person who was spending a lot of time. For example, I've seen this in highway asset management, trying to saying I'm doing BIM, but you get your surveyors and survey contractors to survey data, and they're collecting all the actual points where your defects are, for example, in typical highways type of case. Then you tell the contractor in a specification, can you dumb down the data and then give me some qualitative descriptions of, say, changes or something like that, and then you put it into your asset management system, but then your computer only can't understand that. Your computers understand absolute X and Y, Z, two-dimensional coordinates, maybe three-dimensional coordinates, and the computer, then you can then create algorithms and make programs do that work optimally. Then your insights of like how things deteriorate and how things that you will feed in a very nice DevOps workshop with some developers. You get an output, you make some more money, then you make next thing might be maybe a chief technical officer. You spend a lot of time doing those spreadsheets. So when you kind of realize, actually, I could be doing other things than this mundane trying to get back the data that I should have got, and got a software architect to help me design a new system. Then I would have just maybe done other work, maybe even sales. So that's the kind of thing I see. When you get them to that stage, you realize, you know what, I want to do this. This is the way we want to operate. This aligns to our strategy. By the way, our competitors have started doing it, and we don't match them. We probably might be out of business, or we need to get something unique to make us be better than the competition. Because I don't believe companies compete to be better. They compete to be unique, to get customers that want to work with that type of organization. So that essentially unlocks that inertia. And the key thing, my experience, is that trusted advisor role, that as a consultant, right? That's why consultants probably like us are important, like, because not everybody has that skill set. And from my experience, geographers and people that with that geospatial knowledge and that systems thinking knowledge do make the best consultants, because we are basically trying to convince the customer to look at the actual reality rather than a consensus reality. A group of people say, oh, the earth spinning around the moon, and everybody believes it, and it's a reality. But actually we say, no, the moon is spinning around the earth is spinning around the sun, the earth has things. We actually, this is reality, and this is a system that will model it.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because it's like evidence-based story, because often, as you've probably seen when you've watched some of these podcasts before, often it comes back to good communication skills or lack of in some and telling a story in what I mean is some kind of structured narrative, which is what you're saying. I'm just paraphrasing your point there, but it does come back to, like, we're talking about systems thinking. In my mind, I think it's like a scientific thinking with evidence. I know I'm sort of playing with words here, but often I think, you know, it's the evidence. Geography provides the evidence, or you can demonstrate, or you can show. So I think there is that scientific mindset that maybe a lot of people struggle with, or what I think, again, you're a brilliant example of this, is where you've got that systems thinking, scientific mindset, geographic, but then you can articulate and communicate as we are today. And I think a lot of people can't they can't necessarily do all of it, right? Communication, I think that's a challenge. Do you find that, like, if people can't tell a good story about why we're doing things, then why do it? Like, I wouldn't either. I think that's something that's missing.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Everybody has skills. It's one of my favorite. Someone I would consider a remote mentor is a gentleman called Ray Dalio, and there's a book. He has principles of life and work, and you know, you get to realize that actually, which goes back to another thing, the ESG thing, the social part of it. Like companies, everyone is unique, and everyone has specific skills they're good at, and I hammer this a lot to colleagues, friends, and clients, that don't try to be everything. The things that, let's say, identify partnerships. If, for example, the best example of this is like music, is bands and music. You know, if Coldplay, for example, like, you know, the other guys, you know, can sing, but they told the other guy, you're the best singer, or you play the piano well, or you're the best. You know, they identify what the strengths are and what the weaknesses are, which is the SWOT analysis, and you partner with people to, you don't have to self-deliver everything by yourself, just because you can identify who has strengths that complement your strength. And organizations are like that. You don't, like, you know, there's sometimes I do see it a lot, like, you know, people have this obsession with, I have to do it all myself. But you don't have to do it all. You have to collaborate, partner with other people. And some people have some skills you don't have, and, you know, combining your skills, you get a better outcome if you work with other people.
Yeah, Victor, it's a very good point about collaboration. You mentioned what was BS, British Standards 11,000. I looked, I should know, but let's look it up just to double check. Now it's ISO 44,000 series, 44,001 as well. But that so perhaps surprisingly, that does come up in reference to BIM and information management and information acquisition. Not often, but I have seen it in contracts saying, do you have this? And just to pick up your point on collaboration and partnering, I think as we move into a more integrated and systems-driven and data-driven environment, which we're doing, but as this becomes the norm, I think one of the discriminators will be, can people collaborate well? You know, that would be, all things being equal, which they're not at the moment, but when all things are equal, like different, for example, different survey companies will be able to produce similar surveys, you know. One of the things you'd think is, or do people collaborate well? And so I'm just elaborating on your point, but have you got anything else to add about the collaboration or the challenges around when it doesn't work very well? For example, people not sharing data, that often comes up. Like, people won't give them their data. Like a clients are paid for, you know what I mean? It's locked in the system. Back to your point from earlier, do you come across that often where you just can't get data?
Somebody I was speaking to came to me a couple of last month, and it was like, I work in a company, and the guy in charge responsible for managing the city was a local authority, and we just built a major building, and basically the contractor would not give me the BIM. But I need to integrate that with all their systems in the, like the council tax system, the waste management system, but contractor would not give me the BIM. I've done everything. I don't know who to go to. What do you have any ideas? And the thing was that there wasn't anybody to go to that the role in that organization would facilitate that collaboration. So a lot of the time, it is the social systems, the organizational social systems, the same, like companies are not designed. So maybe there's no chief collaboration officer, for example, or head of, and if there was one, they may be working under somebody whose job it is to stop collaboration from happening. Because maybe somebody says, oh yeah, you know what, maybe they created the job for a project and then they forgot that actually this person needs to be promoted because the new mission of this enterprise is now going to be different. So the actually chief, the head of collaboration may be under somebody whose job it is to not collaborate so that they are bigger in the company, the bigger in the organization. So it's that thinking, which is what ISO 8000 does it for data, where it says, what is the mission of this enterprise and what do we need? What are the capabilities we need for the mission? You want a Boeing 747 to fly around the earth? Yes, it's the flying mission, but it's a mission to get you around the earth, get people around safely, and if you want something to take you to Mars and back, it's still a flying mission, but it's another mission. The capabilities are going to be different, and it's that when does the mission change? How do people know and then react and design all the system? It's a social system, organizational system, to make that deliver the benefits, the value that people have already said. This is what we want at the top level.
Yeah, and that's a brilliant point. When you talked about things being aligned there, I know you didn't use that word, but I was thinking of ISO 55,000 series. Again, we're name dropping all these standards for people. I'll put links into them. But I've nearly had my time with you. But just if you wouldn't mind, I know we've touched on asset management, but again, for the benefit of people listening or watching that are new to these things, could you just explain ISO 55,000, because we are talking about the value of data, so that can be an asset, can't it? The physical things are assets. Could you just explain that and your experience in that? Thank you.
I first got exposed to that when I was in local authority, and then the Institute of Asset Management. I think we met there as well. You were leading the Association for Geographic Information Asset Management.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So but as in the end, an asset is anything that's of potential or actual value to an organization or a group of people, an entity, or even an individual. And sometimes even liabilities may be assets if you manage them well. And and liabilities are things that take away from you, do not add value to you. But if you manage them well, they could be assets. So asset management, that standard, it doesn't matter the type of asset it is, even though there's asset management for IT systems as well. There's asset management standard, ISO for IT systems. So another discipline is called asset management as well, or financial assets. But physical asset management is a standard, the good practice, the standards, the processes, the policies, everything, the organization, the ways of working that enables you to manage assets and deliver optimal value to the stakeholders or the users of the assets. So I'll use it, for example, in even managing data of local authorities, and it's not just in the UK, doing some other jobs, especially through the World Bank, in other places where, especially asset management systems for cities, municipal finances, for example. I was once doing a project where they're trying to build a big infrastructure for one of the country in Africa, and they couldn't prove that they could pay for that road, in the planning to get the loan and everything. And so, being able to tell them, if we documented all your municipal assets, and we count all the buildings in your city, and you levied maybe just a tax of an affordable kind of property rates that's not based on that country, actually the assets that you have to tax is an asset. It was a liability, but by just creating a digital information system, a BIM, or city information model. You could then add financial, this IFRS standard too. And then all of a sudden, you can prove that you can pay and you can get this loan. So it's just simple. Like it's very, a lot of the times it's quite simple. It's just that you have to know what's an asset, what's a liability, what's in the city. Okay, oh, they've got this physical assets. Oh, we don't know how many buildings we have. Oh, that's a problem. You have a capability gap. I can create a solution for you. That solution will help you solve your problem, which is what solutions architects, solution consultants, so like myself, we kind of do. We like problems. We love when someone says there's a problem.
It's quite right, isn't it? It's about problem solving.
Yeah.
I think, but it's knowing all the different elements, because what we've talked about today, and I'd better wrap up in a minute. I know we could both talk all day, but I won't. For the sake of the podcast, we can't today. But I think it's having to know all these different things. Like you've mentioned, multiple standards that are in different domains. You've mentioned, I think that it's like a toolbox, isn't it? It's like you mentioned, a strategy. But you have to know all these things. There's so many different domains. But it's an approach, isn't it? So to make an asset register or create and populate an asset register maybe isn't so complex, but you need to know the approach. Like, ISO 55000 approach, series approach, and then the different protocols you mentioned, the different standard. The standard, which I'm going to try and get it in every podcast now, is ISO 8601, which is, you probably know, but that's the international standard for the date convention.
Yeah.
That always makes me laugh as well. Have you, just sorry quickly because we're running over, but have you got an example of where you've had like the date in multiple formats? That always
we do that in supply chain. That's a major thing, and that's one of the reasons ECMA. The head of ECMA, each time he does his conference, it ends with it. The first actions to take, just create a specification, use the internal 8601 standard for dates. Actually, when I started using it, that's just like not even related to anything asset management. I realized I was having a problem of even like, when did I create this document? When did I read this document? So when I save my documents, I save them based on the dates. I say 2023-01, and I realized it orders all your files. So I was like, if this could just do it in my Windows Explorer thing, just imagine the value it does, because it organizes the information for you, almost like visually that you could, So ISO 8601, that's, in supply chain, that's probably one of the most important things, because transactions take place in dates, times. People ask someone registering a company, selling a product, anything, it takes this date and time. In this three-dimensional universe, that time goes in one direction. Where geographers understand that concept of like, is it XYZ, or time goes in one direction. So, if you log the transaction based on time, then and that ISO 8601 is a very, very useful one.
Yeah. Thank you. And I just mentioned that as like an entry level point for people that are new to these things, saying, oh yeah, we should have and especially in information systems and like we were saying. But I'm going to have to wrap up. But normally, so thanks so much for your insights and your time. Normally what I ask at the end, we may have had enough links to add already because we've mentioned several standards. But is there any websites or any online resources that you would recommend people to go to? It could be about any of the topics we've talked about, but perhaps around something that I don't normally talk about, but things like supply chain integration and anything you recommend people to go to?
There's Electronic Commerce Management Association. The companies, for example, like my company, we have a website. There's a UN standard as well for supply chain integration, open electronic data interchange. There are different ISO standards for that. And then there are organizations, body like GS1, for example, is another one, and most people would actually use it every day, but they don't realize they're using it every day. So there are many standards, and then obviously the BEAM standards, standards for addressing, for example, the ISO standards for addressing. And another standard a lot of geographers don't remember is the earlier ISO 19000 series of standards. For example, 19111 for spatial referencing by coordinates, 19112 for spatial referencing by indirect identifiers, INSPIRE addressing specification, the law, the legislation itself, plus the specifications, and then building specifications. If you read that, it's basically everything you'll see in any BIM standard will be there. Building smart initiative, for example, there is the building from global to local. S3 has very good things like, things like building internal and external interior space data models, the address data models. There's a lot of information.
Yeah.
There's systems engineering as well. There's design and ISO standard, but a lot of good publications around that.
Thank you. Thanks, Victor. What I'll do, like I said, I'll add links for people if they want to know more, and they can follow up. And yeah, we'll have to finish there. To be continued, I hope, on another podcast. But I'm sure I'll see you soon at an event anyway. But thank you so much for your time and your insights. Thank you, Victor Alasia, and it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, pleasure here. Same too. Same as well. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it's a great podcast as well. I've watched almost every single one of them.
Oh, thank you. Right.